Secrets from Under Berlin, the joint operation of the CIA and MI6 to tap information from East Berlin and the Soviet Union. In 1945, Germany was divided into 4 different zones by the Yalta Conference, where the leaders of the countries who allied against Germany decided its fate. They compromised that the treaty would be between 4 different countries: France, Britain, the United States of America, and the Soviet Union. This event came to pass after Germany was conquered during World War II. Tensions were quickly rising, threatening to result in conflict between the US and Soviet Union as the Iron Curtain descended over Germany, dividing it into East and West, communism and democracy. The west side of Germany was considered vastly superior to the East, and many tried to escape from the East into the West, the land of democracy and freedom.
And my dad told the story that he was born in 1936 in Berlin, but his parents moved to a different town in eastern Germany, at around 1940. And then they lived there until 1945, and as the war ended, they tried to escape from the eastern part into the western part, but all the bridges were torn apart, so they had to return and stay in the eastern part.
Because of the conflict and lack of diplomacy between East and West Germany, in the simultaneous Cold War, Berlin became a hotspot for intelligence gathering as it was divided between the 4 key players in the Cold War. The democratic countries of France, the US, and the UK were on the west side, while the Soviet Union, the advocate of communism, occupied the east. The US needed information due to the conflict caused by the Red Scare and the fear of a nuclear attack from the Soviet Union. The CIA debated several ideas on how to go about acquiring this information. They were approached by MI6, the British intelligence service, who had the idea of constructing a tunnel underneath Berlin to tap the underground wires from the East German side that contained valuable intel on the Soviet Union, as the UK wanted the same information that the US did. This compromise became known as Operation Gold to the Americans and Operation Stopwatch to the British.
The conflicts faced while building a tunnel of such magnitude while still keeping it hidden from the Soviet Union were numerous, and many compromises were made. This operation was essential to assuring the U.S. that there was no impending nuclear threat from the Soviet Union and was a factor in preventing nuclear warfare. The Berlin Tunnel project planning phase began by selecting a tunnel location that would most efficiently reach the targeted wires. After the location was selected, they still needed to deal with the 3,000 tons of sand and dirt that would come from digging the tunnel. One person sarcastically suggested that they dig a hole to put the dirt in, but this got people thinking. Eventually, this offhand comment evolved into the idea of making a fake warehouse with a front to store and disperse materials, while, in reality, the warehouse was hiding the Berlin Tunnel entrance and the dirt that was being removed. Planning between the US and the UK continued throughout 1953, which consisted of much debating and conflict. Eventually, in the December of 1953, they reached a compromise as to who would have which responsibilities. The US would build a tunnel to the point beneath the East German wires that would be tapped, record all signals produced, and process all the telegraphic material received from the project in Washington, D.C.
The UK would do all the upward digging, execute the cable taps, and deliver the signal to the head of the tunnel, and provide a joint base of operations in London to process voice recordings. A total of 1,500 US personnel were cleared for the project. As necessary equipment was procured and the digging began, the project ran into a minor snag. They discovered groundwater at 16 feet instead of the predicted 32 feet. Examinations revealed that a clay lens existed in that particular spot, creating a perched water table that possibly sloped downward in the direction of the target. It was decided that they would proceed with the tunnel construction, although top cover would be less than half of what had been anticipated. Because of this relative closeness to the surface, operations had to stop every time East German guards walked over the tunnel on their regular patrols. This perched water table also caused one other conflict for the design of the tunnel. It caused the first half of the tunnel to slope down and the second half to slope upwards. To be careful not to hit the surface when creating the tunnel, the engineers decided that an object of known size would be useful as a reference point. So a baseball game was organized with the objective of knocking a baseball as far as possible into the East German zone.
Somewhat ironically, it was the friendliness of the East German guards who kept returning the ball that complicated this. Fortunately, the engineers were confident that they knew what point to construct the tunnel to, so they would not hit the surface. The tap chamber of the tunnel was a specialized room linked to the tunnel where the wires to be tapped were searched for intel. Concerning this room, the greatest conflict that arose was how to guard against the humidity. Even the moisture in the air caused by the perspiration and breathing of the technicians doing the tapping caused the suspension of the operation several times to dehumidify the chamber. This problem was easily solved with insulation, vapor barriers, and a heavy anti-personnel door of steel and concrete. The tunnel was completed on the 28th of February 1955, and the construction of the tap chamber commenced on the 10th of March that same year. The chamber was completed 18 days later. To fully appreciate this feat, it is necessary to remember that the tunnel was 1,476 feet long, which is roughly the length of the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool, and was dug without the convenience of modern tools and technology.
Even from the very beginning, it was realized that this project would only last for a finite length of time. It was debated as to what stance the U.S. would take and what precautions were to be taken to prepare for the inevitable discovery of the tunnel. After much debate, it was decided that the tunnel was to be planted with explosives at the point it crossed the border with the intent of destroying all evidence of the tunnel upon its discovery. Then the U.S. would deny all knowledge related to the tunnel. The tunnel was discovered on the 21st of April, 1956, after 11 months and 11 days of operation. The early conclusion reached was that the discovery was caused by the combination of one of the cables being in very poor condition and an unusually long period of heavy rainfall. This caused the cable to become inoperative. The Soviets discovered the tap while the cable was being dug up, causing a storm of conflict between the communist and non-communist world. Subsequent developments offered an alternative reason for discovery. MI6 discovered in April 1956 that George Blake, a case officer in their service, had been recruited by the Soviet Union while he was a prisoner in North Korea in 1952 and had continued under their control. He had known everything about the tunnel from the very beginning. Blake stated that he had told the Soviets of the planned tunnel as soon as the final decision for the tunnel's location was made in 1953.
After the tunnel was discovered, the commandant of the Soviet Berlin garrison, who would normally have handled the situation, was absent from Berlin, and the acting commandant, Colonel Ivan A. Kotsuba, was in charge. There is reason to believe that, for some unknown reason, he was forced to make a decision without advice from Moscow. His reaction was unexpected in that he invited the entire Berlin press corps to a briefing and a tour of the tunnel. This resulted in the tunnel being thought of as the most highly publicized peacetime espionage enterprise in modern times. The media's reaction in the US was mainly positive and approving of the operation, while in sharp contrast the Berlin and Soviet media was scornful, as one might expect from the country that was being spied on. There was worldwide recognition and praise for the technical excellence of the installation and the imaginative nature of the operation, while the non-communist world reacted with both surprise and delight that the U.S., previously considered a stumbling neophyte in the field of espionage, was capable of such a feat. With the notable exception of George Blake, there is no indication that a single security leak occurred, which was considered quite an accomplishment for a project of this size. Eventually, when passing traffic, conversations near the chamber recorded on a microphone, and observations from the site were examined, nothing seemed to indicate that the discovery of the tunnel was anything but an accident, and the information received through the wires proved to be entirely accurate and notably invaluable.
This raises the very important question. If George Blake did indeed tell the Soviets about the tunnel, why didn't they do anything about it? Many theories have arisen. Some think that maybe George Blake was lying, but there's no explanation as to why he would lie. Others suggest something happened to Blake's contact and the information never reached the Soviets. Even some suggest that the Soviets purposely allowed the operation to happen to lessen the tension of conflict between the US and the Soviet Union and show that they had no intention of launching nuclear weapons. Whatever the case, the discovery of the Berlin Tunnel caused even more conflict between the US and the Soviet Union in the long run, and many believe this operation was one of the reasons the Berlin Wall was built, as any semblance of trust between the two sides was broken. The Berlin Tunnel produced copious amounts of data until its termination in April 1956. It produced 50,000 reels of tape, 443,000 transcribed conversations, 40,000 hours of telephone conversations, 6 million hours of telephone traffic, and 1,750 intelligence reports. The Berlin Tunnel was essential, a joint operation between the US and the UK to gain important information on the Soviet Union's activities. Their compromise and teamwork ability helped quell the many conflicts that came with the project's planning and also the conflicts and challenges that they encountered while constructing the tunnel. The vital information gained helped assure the US that there was no impending nuclear attack and may have well prevented a nuclear conflict between the two countries.